Okay, hi everybody, good to see you again, and I'll just read the shir is dedicated for praying for victory of our soldiers and all the fronts of the war, for the lasting unity of the people of Israel, and for all of those whose health has been affected by the war, and the safe return of all the hostages. B'ezras Hashem, we've already seen the beginning of it. Aliyat Neshamot, Yitzchak Hirsh ben Eliezer, Shalom Ben Freichah, and David Fischel ben Yichiel Mayer on behalf of all of his grandchildren. And we have a special dedication and celebration of the 101st birthday for Rivka Leah bas Avraham, Rita Lowi, by her loving daughter Phyllis Miller. Baruch Hashem, and should be Mashlim Meya v'Yesrim Shana v'Od in good health. And finally, congratulations to the new American president and administration. Much bracha and hatzlacha. Again, I think all of us had a sense of, I really shouldn't speak for everybody, but many Jews, particularly in Israel, have a tremendous euphoria with the new administration. And, Baruch Hashem, you actually see that political power can be used for good, which is a little bit of a chiddush, actually. But there is such a thing as someone who just uses his power to accomplish good things. But we also have to remember, ultimately, everything is in God we trust, which is on the coinage of the U.S., although not in Israel, it ought to be, but in the United States, in God we trust. And the Navi said, Baruch hagever sheyiftach b'Hashem, blessed is the person who puts his trust in God, and the other way around, Oror hagever sheyiftach b'Adam. And the Meforshim explain, that doesn't mean if you trust in man, you will be cursed. But it means the very fact of putting your trust in man puts you in an accursed state. You're vulnerable. Things can change every minute. Even with Trump, there were statements earlier in the week, that were a little not so pro the needs of the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael, but then he goes back on it. So the point basically is that Ezras Hashem, he should be a shaliach l'tov, both for Am Yisrael and really for the world. But ultimately, God calls the shots, and God determines what happens in the world. And he's not Jewish, so he's not Mashiach, and the like. But still, we wish him and the whole administration much mazel and bracha. I'm sure you saw that he met with the hostage families, at least the ones that are in America, and he was connecting to them. And the other topic, which I've already talked about in other places, I'm only going to allude to, is the issue of the very conflicting emotions that all of us have. Every time a hostage is released, we feel a tremendous joy that Baruch Hashem, their suffering has finished. They've been reunited with their families. If they're in good health, it's even better. At the same time, look at the price. The price is that to get the Chatufim back, terrorists and murderers are being released like a poison into the body politic. And chas v'shalom, we hope not, but chas v'shalom, these are people who killed once and murdered more than once, and they're just being released. And we wonder, what was the purpose of the war? What was the purpose of the chayolim dying if we simply have a situation where Hamas can be rebuilt and Gaza can be repopulated? Who knows? Some people say there were some secret agreements when Trump put pressure on it. Maybe Israel can bomb Iran, who knows? So maybe in point of fact, this will turn out to be much b'hatzlacha. I just want to allude to the fact, I'm not going to give you a halachic shir in this, I've given this shir elsewhere, that there is a major machlokas haposkim. If in order to free Chatufim, we are permitted to kind of give in to terrorist demands. Rav Ovadia Yosef and his son, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the present chief rabbi, has taken the position that the imperative of pidyon shvuyin, ransoming captives, and pikuach nefesh, and taking people out of dangerous situations, justifies giving in to any demand, because we have to save these people's lives. That is approach number one, and other Gedolim have endorsed that as well. Approach number two has been that when you're fighting an enemy that tries to destroy you, you can't, so to speak, give in to any type of demand because you're saving some lives. You have to look at the long-term repercussions. That, you might be saving whatever it is, 20, 30, 100 lives by endangering the future security of the entire population by terrorists who will come back. So in point of fact, October 7 itself was an example of that, where Sinwar, who Baruch Hashem is no longer in this world, but Sinwar was released. He was already in Israeli custody under a life sentence. We also did him the favor of emergency brain surgery, but okay, that's a separate issue. He was released as part of the Gilad Shalit exchange, and he was largely the architect of the October 7 massacre. So essentially, we did save Gilad Shalit, and I'm very, very happy for that, but who knows if that caused over 1,000 deaths and 200 hostages. So there are poskim who basically say you cannot give in to these types of deals, in the same way that every chayal who fights is essentially risking his life for the greater cause, then tragically, and it hurts my heart to even say this, but some have taken the position, even halachically, that the chatufim would have to be regarded as kind of like chayolim, that in order to secure the success of the overall objective, there are people that have to give their lives. Now, how do you tell a mother that? How do you look so? So actually, one of the mothers said, a very powerful statement, she said that I scream and cry and demand that my son be released, no matter what, and I hope that the government won't listen to me, that they'll take into account the larger objective. So, b'kitzur, I'm not here to give you any psak halacha at all, but all I can tell you is that the ambivalence that I think all of us feel is actually mirrored in a halachic debate. It's actually a very significant halachic debate. And this is not the first time that we face this. I mean, we face it now. We faced it with the Gilad Shalit. We faced it actually even in Entebbe, although Entebbe wound up to be a rescue mission. But in the early stages of Entebbe, the conversation also was about releasing terrorists and the like. Now, from Israel's standpoint, it may have been a ploy, but nevertheless, the Rabbanim at the time were discussing the halacha. So this goes back quite a long time, and it's actually discussed in Maseches Gittin, a Mishnah, that says we don't pay excessive ransom to kidnappings, lest we embolden the enemy to continue to go down this path. And the whole machlokas is how you apply that Mishnah to the contemporary situation. So, as I say, I don't want to get into the halachic technicalities, but I guess the situation is such that I needed to say just a few words about it. But bein kach u bein kach, that should not obscure the joy that we feel that people are home. And in some ways, even if Israel's deal is foolish from one perspective, but at the same time, it shows how much Am Yisrael cares about every single Jew. And in a sense, even when it's mistaken, for whatever, if it is mistaken, but it comes from a Jewish greatness that every single person, and in fact, as you know from the past, Israel has done these deals not just to save lives, they've done so even to reclaim dead bodies. Halachically, that's even more questionable. I mean, how can you endanger the public in order to get back a dead body for burial? Okay, again, I'm not here to address Piskei Halacha here, but I do think that you still have to see the greatness of Klal Yisrael, that we care so much. And that's something to be very, very proud of, that we value life, and we value our chayalim, and we value our chatufim. And, we want to do whatever we can. And Chazal have a saying, Ava mikalkeles es ashura, that actually means great love can sometimes throw your judgment out of whack. Okay, so again, I don't mean to give you any definitive psak, but if you consider this type of deal to be a kilkul, which it might be, but it comes from Ava, it does come from a good place, a good midah in Am Yisrael that we need to build on and we need to increase. And in fact, I've said many, many times already, I almost say it almost every week since October 2023, that this was the silver lining of all that we've gone through, and that is it has brought us together in a more powerful way. Unfortunately, some of that achdus is dismantling. That happens to be true. But at its best, that achdus was very much strengthened, specifically in this time of adversity. So now let's go to the Parsha. Obviously, we're dealing with the Parshiot of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And there's always something very poignant about Moshe Rabbeinu's first appearance to Paro. Hashem appears to Moshe Rabbeinu, the shepherd, in the burning bush. And Moshe is not a young man. You know, at the age of 80, you think about retiring, right, and the like. So Moshe didn't envision that the last part of his life would be, so pivotal. And he's shepherding along, and God appears to him in the burning bush. And God gives him a mission to go and take my people out of Egypt. I have heard their prayers. I have seen their suffering. I remember the covenants that I made to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And Moshe just argues with the Almighty over and over and over again. He says, I'm not good enough. They're not good enough. He uses both types of arguments. I'm not worthy. They're not worthy. Get somebody better. Get somebody more articulate. I don't speak well. Every excuse in the book. Chazal actually say he was arguing with God for a whole week, although the Chumash does not give you a timeline. Finally, God kind of gives him a direct order. You're going whether you like it or not. And Aaron will be your interpreter. You don't talk very well. Aaron will be the one that will convey the message. So Moshe finally goes to Paro together with Aaron, and Moshe does all of the signs. He turns the staff into a snake and the water into the blood. This is not the plague of blood, but this is the preliminary, just establishing his credentials. And the problem is, of course, that Paro's magicians, Egypt is full of kishuf, can do all the same things. Yeah, it's true that Moshe's snake swallows up the other ones, but still, more or less, they did the same thing. And Paro turns on Moshe and he says, hey, this agitation for civil rights, equality, freedom, that's because they have too much time on their hands. So they start thinking about things. I'm going to make it worse. From now on, the quota of bricks they have to make is going to be the same, but they're going to have to gather the straw for the bricks. And Moshe leaves Paro, and he's met with the angry glances of all of the Jews that have heard he's made their life worse, not better. I mean, imagine this. Moshe begged God not to go. And then he goes. And everything becomes worse than it was. And this actually breaks Moshe Rabbeinu. This is one of the places in the Torah where Moshe's spirit is actually broken. Moshe says to Hashem, Lama hareyosa liyamazeh. Why have you done bad to this people? And then he adds, Lama zeh shlachtani. Why did you send me? From the time that I came to Paro, not only did you not save the nation, you made it worse. That's kind of how the end of Parsha Shmos. You have to read it. Sometimes, we get a little thrown off because it's different, the Parshios HaShavua, but you have to realize that Parshas Vaeira is the middle of a conversation. It's the middle of this conversation. And God says to him, you're a man who lacks faith. I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and I made promises to them, and they never saw the full fruition of those promises. But they believed in me. And you're not believing in me when I make a promise that you're going to see with your own eyes. And at that point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, tell Bnei Yisrael, I am God, Ani Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And Rashi actually explains a little different. We normally say Yud Kei Vav Kei is the midah of Rachamim. Rashi here, based on Chazal, gives a bit of a different nuance. The Yud Kei Vav Kei is Ne'eman L'Shalem Sechar. I am trustworthy. I am dependable. I carry out what I say I'm going to do. Ani Hashem. And then we have the famous 4 Lishonot of redemption. Hotseisi Eschem, I will take you out of Egypt. Hitzalti Eschem, I will save you from the servitude. Goalti Eschem, I will redeem you. V'lokachti etchem li liyam, I will take you unto me for a nation. There is a 5th term, Vehevese, I will bring you to the land. I'll get to that in a minute. But it's Yadua, that all of us know, of course, that there's a mitzvah, Seder night, to drink 4 cups of wine, Dalit Kosos. It's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, it's not a mitzvah d'Oraisa. The first cup is Kiddush, the second cup is at the end of the Magid, at the end of the narrative. The third cup is after benching, and the fourth cup is after Hallel. Which means it's actually, what I just said is an important thing to keep in mind halachically. It's not just drinking 4 cups of wine, it's doing mitzvos over a cup of wine. We do Kiddush over wine, we do Magid over wine, we do benching over wine, we do Hallel over wine. That actually has important repercussions. When the Haggadah says fill up your cup when it tells you to. Meaning, a person might think, I'll fill up my cup when it's time to drink the cup. I'll fill up my cup. No good. You got to recite the Magid over the wine. You got to recite the Hallel over the wine, not just drink the wine. So, in fact, the Brisker Rav actually said, a Chiddush, the Brisker Rav said that the cup you drink has to be the same cup over which you perform the mitzvah. So the Brisker Rav says the following: if I said Magid over a cup of wine, and then that cup spilled, and I have to refill it, I got to recite the whole Magid over again on the cup that I'm going to drink. I can't say Magid over this cup and drink some other cup. Ad kedei kach, the Amira ala kos is very pivotal. Now, the Gemara itself, of course, talks about the chiyuv of Dalit Kosos, and it even makes the point that women are also chayavot in Dalit Kosos because they too partook of the miracle of redemption. But the Gemara, strangely enough, does not, even though every child in Cheder learns the reason for Dalit Kosos, the Gemara itself does not give any. Well, the only reason the Gemara gives is actually a technical reason. If I learned the whole Talmud Bavli, and I ask, according to the Talmud Bavli, why are there 4 cups of wine? The only reason you have is because there are 4 mitzvos that you got to do over wine: Kiddush, Magid, benching, and Hallel. That's the only reason the Gemara gives. But both Rashi and his grandson, the Rashbam, it's interesting, Arvei Pesachim is so interesting. The Rashbam was one of Rashi's grandchildren. He was the older brother of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam is Rav Yaakov ben Meir, and Rashbam is Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir. Both of them are, Gedolei Rishonim. And we know in Maseches Bava Basra, we only have Rashi's commentary till the middle of the 2nd perek. We don't know why exactly. And the rest of the Maseches, we only have the commentary of Rashbam. So one thing that everybody notices is that the Rashbam's commentary is around 5 times the size of Rashi's commentary, that Rashi's koach of abbreviation, clarity and brevity, is literally unsurpassed. It actually is miraculous in many ways. The Rashbam is much more marich. Now, but you don't have a controlled experiment because you can't compare Rashi and the Rashbam, because in Bava Basra, where you have the Rashbam, you don't have Rashi, and when you have Rashi, you don't have the Rashbam. But in Arvei Pesachim, which is the last perek of Pesachim that talks about the seder, I don't know why. The Rashbam wrote a commentary on Arvei Pesachim, even though Rashi also has a commentary on Arvei Pesachim. So there, you can actually do a scientifically controlled experiment because you can compare the 2 commentaries on the same line of Gemara, and there too you'll see if Rashi says it in 1 word, Rashbam will say it in 5 words. If Rashi says it in 2 sentences, Rashbam will say it in 10 sentences and the like. So Arvei Pesachim, you actually have a proof. By the way, that's why they say although Maseches Bava Basra has the most number of pages in Shas, it does not have the most number of words. The pages of Bava Basra are actually relatively short because the Rashbam's commentary is huge. So the truth is, Maseches Bava Basra is not the largest Maseches in Shas, even though it has the most pages for Daf Yomi purposes and the like. But the reason I'm bringing it up is the following. The famous drasha that every cheder kid knows, that the reason we have 4 cups of wine is because of the 4 lishonot of Geula, is not in the Babylonian Talmud at all. It is from the Yerushalmi, which is then quoted by Rashi and the Rashbam. Okay, it's pretty amazing. That it's an interesting example of things that have become the common knowledge of Klal Yisrael, but are not from the Babylonian Talmud. They're more from a less accessible source, Talmud Yerushalmi. I mean, most people don't even learn the Talmud Yerushalmi, again, rightly or wrongly, and yet this is from the whole makor of the Daled Lashonos of Geula being the basis of the 4 cups of wine is from the Yerushalmi. As a little aside, let me mention another halacha of Pesach that we only know from the Talmud Yerushalmi, and that is the Iser of eating matzah on Erev Pesach. Now we know that technically you are allowed to eat matzah. I mean, some people have minhagim, they don't eat matzah from Purim, or they don't eat matzah from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Right? Those are minhagim. But technically, you are allowed to eat matzah until Erev Pesach in the morning, which actually means the Isra of eating matzah kicks in earlier than the Isra of eating chametz. I can eat chametz until 3 hours into the day, but I'm not allowed to eat matzah from the beginning of the day. And the Yerushalmi basically says that anyone who eats matzah on Erev Pesach, it is similar to having intimate relations with your betrothed woman before you've recited the Sheva Brachos, etc., meaning it'll be mutter later, but right now you're not allowed to do it. So this is a halacha in the Shulchan Aruch that you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach, and yet it is totally based on the Yerushalmi. It's not in the Babylonian Talmud at all. So this is yet another example of something that is only learned from the Yerushalmi. Okay, but be it as it may, there are other reasons for Dalet Kosos as well, but we're going to go with the most common reason, that the Isser of the Chiyuv of Dalet Kosos is Keneged the Dalet Lishonos of Geula. So the obvious question becomes, why do we need 4 Lishonos of Geula? Yitzias Mitzrayim was a single event. God took us out of Mitzrayim. What are the 4 Lishonos of Geula? So I'm going to mention first a pshat from the Nitziv in the Hamik Davar. Then we'll give something that's a little bit more mystic. The Nitziv actually points out that the freedom, and again, he has a very, very beautiful, intricate way of showing this in the text. He says, the Jewish people achieved freedom in gradual stages. That during the Makos, there were times that Paro didn't respond at all, and there were times that he gave them a little bit of movement. Right? So the Nitziv points out the following. Initially, Paro did respond. Well, the way he's medayik in the psukim is, the first 3 plagues, Paro didn't move an inch. The blood, the frogs, the lice, nothing happened. Everything was exactly as bad as it was. So nothing happened. But the second group of plagues, the Nitziv says, Paro took away what is called the avodas perech, the back-breaking labor was taken away, and they just remained regular slaves. By the third group, even the slavery was taken away, but they weren't allowed to leave Mitzrayim. And then, of course, the last plague, Makas Bechoros, they left Mitzrayim, and eventually they got the Torah. So the Nitziv says, the 4 shalavim, the 4 stages in freedom was Number one, taking away the avodas perech, but they're still avadim. Number two, taking away the avdut, but they still had to remain in Egypt. Number three, leaving Egypt, which happened on Pesach. Number four, Matan Torah, because the fourth lashon, Lokachti etchem liliam, is generally understood as Matan Torah. So the four lishonos of Geula means freedom came to us in our four stages. Removal of perech, number one. Removal of avdut, number two. Being able to leave Mitzrayim, number three. Matan Torah, number four. And again, Matan Torah, of course, has nothing to do with the Makos, but within the Makos, he does have this pattern of three things happening during the Makos, meaning avodas perech, avdus, being able to leave Mitzrayim. This is how the Nitziv understands it, and again, it fits the Psukim very, very well. And this, of course, is what Chazal actually say. Chazal actually say that the Jewish people stopped being slaves Rosh Hashanah, which is 6 months before Pesach. That corresponds to the idea that there was a period during the Makos where we weren't able to leave Egypt, but we were no longer technically avadim, right? So that type of stage did occur. But I want to share with you a thought from the Chidushei Harim, Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz, the first Rebbe of Gera, the Gera Rebbe, the Sfas Emes's father. And he correlates two different midrashim. On one hand, we say, of course, that the 4 cups of wine are keneged the 4 lashonos of Geula in Mitzrayim. But there are two midrashim. One midrash says the significance of 4 lashonos of Geula is because there were 4 evil decrees that Paro had promulgated against us, and we needed a redemption from each of those 4 decrees at different times. Decree number 1 was the servitude. Decree number 2 was when he said, remember he had an astrological vision that the Savior of Israel is going to be born, etc. So he decreed that the soldiers come in. I'm sorry, first he decreed that the soldiers come in and they kill every male child. That was the second decree, and that was not so matzliach. So then the third decree required the miyaldos, the midwives, to come and kill the boys. That was Shifra and Pua, Yochebed and Miriam, and that they didn't do. So decree number 1 was the slavery itself. Decree number 2 was the genocide of the soldiers. Decree number 3 was the attempted genocide by the miyaldos, by the midwives. And decree number 4 is the last decree, and that is the gathering of straw. You have to gather your straw. It's not going to be given to you. So this medrash tells us that the 4 lashonot of Geula are keneged the 4 gezeros of Parai. That is medrash number 1. Medrash number 2 says that the 4 lishonos of Geula correspond to the 4 exiles that the Jewish people will go through in their future history. Mitzrayim is like the prototype of Galus. But after we come to Eretz Yisrael, and there's the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, etc., we go through 4 exiles, right? This notion of the 4 exiles appears over and over and over again. It appears in Maoz Sur, the Hanukkah song. It appears in the book of Daniel many, many times. In the book of Zechariah. And what are the 4 exiles? The first exile is Babylonia, which destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and exiled us. Babylonia was succeeded by Persia, Paras, in which the Purim story happens. Paras was eventually conquered by Greece, Alexander. That created the Golus of Yavan. And Yavan was eventually conquered by Rome. And Rome is said to be the descendant of Esav and Edom. And Edom, of course, was Machriv, the second Beis HaMikdash. And the Golus that we are in is described in this very day as the Golus of Edom, the Roman Golus. And even though you may ask, well, why is it called the Roman Golus? The Romans are long gone. There are no Romans ruling in the world. Even in Italy, there are no Romans, and certainly Italy anyway is not any empire. But the short answer is, it makes no difference if the Romans are here or not. What the Romans did, the Golus of Rome, the Golus of Esav, has not been rectified. The temple is destroyed. Mashiach has not come. Moreover, in various statements of Chazal, the Roman Golus morphed into Christianity, which became the dominant oppressor of the Jewish people in our history, and generally Western civilization as a whole. It came from Rome. Rome took it from Greece and spread it throughout the world. So even if there's no ethnic Romans around, this is called the Golus of Esav. Now, in truth, Chazal always describe over and over and over again, with very rare exceptions, that the four exiles, once again, are Bavel, Paras, Yavan, and Edom. Those are the four exiles. However, there is one passage in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a medrash, that actually talks about the final stage of Golus that we will face, will be the Golus of Yishmael. Yishmael, and that will be the most dangerous of the Golus of all. Actually, I hesitate to say this because whenever I say this, it gets posted on an Arab website, so you may have come across it, whatever. That I talk about the zechuyot of Bnei Yishmael, and they use it for propaganda techniques, so I can't really help it, unfortunately. So I'm not going to be marich in that precisely because I don't want it to happen again. But it does say, because Bnei Yishmael have certain spiritual merits, whether it be bris milah, whether it be tznius, whether it be praying to Hashem 5 times a day, etc. And that makes them a more difficult enemy to vanquish because there is a certain spiritual power there. Now that seems to contradict Chazal's typology, because Chazal always talk about the Golus of Edom as the last exile before Mashiach, and yet we actually see it in our own eyes, how Golus Yishmael, in terms of Arab terrorism, or Islamic terrorism, I should say, kind of terrorizes the world. But the truth is, it's not a stira, because the Golus as a whole is Golus Edom, because there's no question that the vast majority of Jews in the world are living under Christian domination. So it's like Golus Yishmael is a 4.1, meaning this is the fourth Golus, that's the Golus of Esav. It's going to be augmented by Yishmael. But essentially, we don't regard Golus Yishmael as a separate exile, but it's a certain intensification of tzara that we're going to have, in which the last struggles that we will face as Am Yisrael will be the confrontations between Esav and Yishmael in different ways. Western civilization versus Islamic fundamentalism, and that indeed is maybe the major challenge that the world faces today, and that's connected to the meaning of Gog and Magog and the struggles of Gog and Magog. Many actually see this as Esav versus Yishmael, and we happen to be in the middle, so we get affected, we get hit by traffic moving in both sides. But be it as it may, the medrash I'm quoting about the Dalit Kosos does not mention Yishmael. It simply says the 4 Kosos, or actually not the 4 Kosos, the 4 Lashonot. I'm going back to the Chumash itself. The 4 Lashonot of Geula is really God's promise that just as I will redeem you from Mitzrayim, I will redeem you from Bavel, from Paras, from Yavan, and from Edom. So we have 2 different midrashim. Again, midrash number 1 correlates the 4 Lashonot of Geula to the 4 decrees of Paro. Medrash number 2 correlates the 4 Lashonos of Geula to the 4 exiles. Right, so the first medrash is focusing on 4 bad things in Mitzrayim, the second medrash is making it a much broader idea that Hashem will redeem us from the 4 exiles. So the Chidushei HaRim wants to say, he wants to correlate these 2 midrashim in a very interesting way. If you remember, by the bris bein hapsarim, by the covenant of the parts, when Avraham went into a deep slumber, and Hashem gave him an ominous, frightening prophecy that your children will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved, and they will be persecuted for 400 years. Parshas Lech Lecha. And the nation that enslaves them I will judge. And your children will then leave the land, Berchush Gadol, with great wealth. Right? That's the bris bein hapsarim. We allude to it in the Haggadah, right? That very verse is in the Haggadah of Pesach. So we do have the famous idea that Hashem told Avraham they're going to be enslaved, or they're going to be in a land that is not theirs for 400 years. Now, in point of fact, the Jewish people were only in Mitzrayim 210 years. From the time that Yaakov Avinu came down to Egypt till the time that Moshe Rabbeinu took them out of Egypt is only 210 years. And as I mentioned last week, even within that 210 years, since they didn't become slaves until Yosef and all the tribes died, that takes off more than 100 years. They were slaves for less than 100 years. But the question is, God said 400 years. How do you reconcile the 400 years with the 210? So Rashi suggests an answer. Again, Rashi didn't make up the answer, but it's based on Chazal, that it didn't say they would be slaves in Egypt for 210 years. No nation is mentioned at all. They will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. And that could even include living in Eretz Yisrael if you don't have a sense that this is your land. And therefore we count it from the birth of Yitzchak. From the birth of Yitzchak till Yetzias Mitzrayim is indeed 400 years. That's the well-known answer that Rashi gives. But the Chidushei HaRim, based on other Chazals, says the following idea. Had we stayed in Mitzrayim 400 years, that could have purified us from all of the impurities, all of the defects, all of the deficiencies. Just like an iron furnace. Indeed, Mitzrayim is described in the Torah. Remember that pasuk? I took you out of the kor habarzel. I took you out of the iron furnace. That's exactly how Mitzrayim is described. What does an iron furnace do? Again, iron furnace here does not mean the furnace is made of iron. It means a furnace in which you purify iron. It melts away, it burns away impurities. So the Chidushei HaRim says a very disheartening thought. Had we been able to stay in Mitzrayim 400 years, that would have burnt away all the spiritual impurities. And we would have been ready for Mashiach, Geula. We would have entered Eretz Yisrael with Moshe Rabbeinu. And there would be an immediate Beis HaMikdash that would never be destroyed. This would be it. This would be it. Mitzrayim, because after all, by Matan Torah, we had reached the level of Gan Eden, etc., and perhaps there even wouldn't have been a Cheda Ego had we burnt away all the impurities. So the Cheda Ego wouldn't have happened. But what was the problem? The problem is we couldn't stay for 400 years because it adversely was pulling us down. We were on the 49th level of impurity. Had we stayed another few minutes, we would have hit level 50. We would have been irredeemable. I mean, chemotherapy is a perfect example. If Rahman al-Islam, a person has cancer, and they go through intensive chemotherapy, and the chemotherapy is the only thing that's going to kill the cancer. But the chemotherapy is so strong and so potent that it's actually lethal to the person. The chemo can kill the person. So what do you have to do sometimes? Sometimes you have to stop the chemotherapy so the patient won't die. but that leaves the cancer inside, which can grow and grow and grow and eventually kill them. So says the Chidushei Harim, I'm using modern vocabulary, the Mitzrayim was a spiritual chemotherapy, a Korah Barzel. And had we completed the course of treatment, the spiritual cancers of Mechiras Yosef and hatred would have been gone. And then we would have received the Torah in a great state of purity. But what happened was it was having the negative effect of pulling us down. We weren't able to take that treatment. So God had to cut it short. But here's the problem. This is why it's disheartening. By cutting the Galus Mitzrayim short by 190 years, he left the cancers within us. Thus we have the Chet HaEgel, we have the Chet HaMeraglin, and the need for the thousands of years of Galus that we've gone through. It's like interest. Had we been able to last another 190 years, we would not have needed the thousands of years of Galus that we had. But, again, cancer is such a perfect analogy. If the cancer was left within a person, it grows and grows and grows, and then you need more radical treatment to get rid of it. So, therefore, the Chidushei Harim says, if that's going to be the case, every Galus we go through is kind of an intensification of what we should have gone through in Mitzrayim. He actually wants to suggest, this is a beautiful connection, that the 4 decrees of Paro, actually, which were, Baruch Hashem, not totally fulfilled, they were played out in the 4 exiles. So Gezerah 1 in Mitzrayim turned into Galus Bavel. I'll explain how. Gezerah 2 of Paro turned into the Galus of Paras. Gezerah 3 of Paro had to turn into the Galus of Yavon. And Gezerah 4 had to turn into the Galus of Edom, because we didn't complete the Mitzrayim process. It had to be carried out in the 4 exiles. So let's make a correlation. Again, a very, very brilliant thought. He says, when we look at the first Gezerah of Paro is servitude. Right? He made us slaves. We lost our freedom. That actually corresponds to the Babylonian exile. Because in truth, if we ask ourselves, under which exile did we lose our freedom? It's only true for Galus Bavel, because Galus Bavel took a free nation under the kings of Israel, or the Malchi Yehuda, and conquered it, subjugated it. Once you talk about Persia, Greece, and Rome, there was no free Jewish nation. Persia took over from Babylonia, and Greece took over from Persia, and Rome took over. Now, the one exception is that at some point in the Greek period, we did have the Hanukkah revolt and the Hasmonean Malchus. So there was an independent Jewish state for around 100 years. But in truth, Chazal did not have high regard for the Malchus of the Hashmonaim. It actually regards them as just Greeks in the sense of the values that they were espousing. So in a sense, therefore, the Gezerah of Avdus corresponds to Babylonia, because it's Babylonia that made us slaves. All the other Goliaths were just continuing that loss of political freedom. So Avdus, Gezerah number 1, corresponds to Galus Bavel. Now, the next Galus is Persia. Now, the Persian exile was very, very short. It was, according to Chazal, it was only around 50 years, meaning from the time that Cyrus conquered the Babylonian Empire till Alexander of Macedonia conquered the Persian Empire, was only 52 years. The Galus of Paras is very short, but the one outstanding event that happened in the Galus of Paras was the story of Purim and the Gezerah of Haman and that represents genocide. So, the Galus of Bavel represents subjugation. The Galus of Persia represents genocide. And that corresponds to the second Gezeirah of Paro, where the soldiers were commanded to murder the Jewish babies, throw them into the Nile. Baruch Hashem, that didn't happen, but that left us vulnerable to the second Galus of Paras, which was genocide. Now, the third association is a bit more subtle. The third Gezeirah of Paro, you'll recall, seems to also be genocidal, and that is the midwives were instructed to drown, I'm sorry, actually I have to apologize. I think I mixed up my sequence. The Miyaldos, the midwives were first. I'm sorry, the second Gezeirah of Paro was the midwives. Again, I want to correct that. Were the midwives. That's the second Gezeirah. The third Gezeirah is the soldiers throwing them into the water. So the midwives we would describe as Paro's attempt to commit genocide against the Jewish people. That corresponds to Persia, the Gezeirah of Haman. Now the third Gezeirah is when the midwives didn't do their job, the soldiers were told to throw the kids into the river. This corresponds with Greece, but in an association that's a little bit more symbolic. When we look at the Nisayon, going back to Hanukkah a little bit, when we look at the Nisayon that we faced with Greece, it was a Nisayon that was primarily one of spiritual assimilation. Meaning, unlike Persia, where Haman wanted to kill our bodies, and Haman did not care if we were religious or not religious. Haman and Hitler are very much the same. Kill every Jew. Yavon was a bit more subtle. Antiochus was not an anti-Semite in the model of Hitler. In fact, one might even say Antiochus was an enlightened despot. Antiochus was perfectly happy to give Jews full political and economic rights as long as they give up that which makes them distinctively Jewish. Assimilate, become Greek, adopt the mores, adopt the philosophies, and everything will be good for you. So although Hanukkah turned into a war, and we talked about this extensively, but Hanukkah was a spiritual struggle, much more than a political or military struggle. Now Greece, we talked about this, had much, much wisdom. There was valuable philosophy, valuable insight. Chachma. When Chazal say, if someone tells you there's wisdom among the Goyim, believe them, that's referring to the Greek wisdom. Wisdom, just like Torah, is compared to water. Water is life-giving. Water is purifying. Water refreshes the soul. But water can also drown you if you use it the wrong way. Water can kill you. So the notion of drowning the babies in the water is an allusion to the Golus of Yavan, where contact with the water philosophies of Yavan, which could have refreshed your soul and could have elevated you. But when they're taken to rebel against God, they suffocate and destroy you. So you see where he's going, meaning Gezeirah number 1 of Paro, which is servitude, corresponds to Babylonia that took away our freedom. Gezeirah number 2, about killing the Miyaldos, killing the babies, corresponds to Paras, which is physical genocide. Gezeirah number 3, that the Chayolim, the soldiers, will drown the babies in a symbolic way, is a remes to Yavan, where the wisdom of Yavan, that could be called water, could also turn into a vehicle that will suffocate you and destroy your spiritual essence. You see his thesis again. His thesis is that because these Gezeiros did not run through the entire process. They needed to be carried out in the exiles over many more years. So now we come to the fourth Gezerah. And the fourth Gezerah seems to be innocuous in some ways. I mean, it's a Gezerah, but what's so bad? The Gezerah of gathering your own straw. Your quota is not diminished. You have to gather your own straw. That is said to correspond to the galus of Edom. Again, the galus of Esav, the Roman exile. The exile that we are still in, albeit augmented by Yishmael. What's the kesher? What's the connection between the gathering of straw and the galus of Esav? So Rivka Leah suggests that the galus the Gezerah of straw is described as pisor. People had to scatter to get their straw. Because it wasn't brought to them. Meaning, when I was just making my bricks, I stayed in one place and they brought me the straw and I made my bricks. This is mechayev me to scatter. So the characteristic of galus Esav, this is called the galus of being scattered. In what way is that true? So it's true in some superficial ways. And it's also true in ways that are far deeper and more profound. Superficially, we are told that the galus of Edom will be the greatest scattering of the Jewish people of any galus. Under the Babylonian galus, we were in Babylon. The Persian Empire was bigger, we were in Persian Empire and other countries, etc. The galus of Edom, we're every place in the world. There's even a chazal, Mashiach cannot come until Jews are every place in the world. Even Antarctica. I saw my friend of mine from Yeshiva, who's now a very, very chashuv Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yitzchak Hirsh. Some of you might have heard shiurim from him. So when they advertise his tape series, they say, Rabbi Friend has listeners in every continent. And they put in parentheses, including Antarctica. Apparently there's a Jewish guy in Antarctica who listens to shiurim. So pisor in the most literal sense is we're all over the place. It also means the breakup of families. No, it was for a lot of the Middle Ages, and certainly way before that. People lived in the same house, the same community, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren built up a community. They say in Prague, just a cute little thing, that of course, in Chutz La'aretz, Ashkenazim only duched on Yom Tov, not like here every day. But there was a Kohen in Prague who had 12 sons who were Kohanim, and his 12 daughters married Kohanim. So when they would duchen on Yom Tov, there would be 25 Kohanim from that family going up. So he says, this is how you're Makayim duchening, because duchening is introduced in the Torah by the verse, Ko sevarchu es b'nei Yisrael, so shall you bless b'nei Yisrael. Ko, chapeh, is b'gematria 25. A real duchening got 25 Kohanim getting up there. That notion of families being together. But we live in pisor. But pisor is not just geographical. Pisor is also psychological. People are distanced from each other. There is the pisor of a lack of connection of husband and wife. The alienation of parents and children. The sinas chinam that exists between us. Scattering. And think, by the way, going back to Mitzrayim itself, how the Gezerah of Teven actually facilitates hatred. Because here's the thing. It creates competition, so to speak. Meaning, if I have my straw and you have your straw, so I do my thing, you do your thing, and your success does not stop me from my success. Yeah, you might do more than me, but that's because you do more than me, but you're not stopping me from doing whatever I'm able to do. Once we got a forage for the straw, every time you pick something up, it may not be available for me. It introduced a certain notion of competitiveness, rivalry, sinah. The galus of Edom is the galus of sinat chinam. What do Chazal say? The second temple was destroyed because of hatred and polarization. So Pizor has a lot of connotations. Geographical distancing, breakup of families in the sense of being separated, the polarizations between husband and wife, parent and children, the sinat chinam within Am Yisrael. And then there's even a deeper level of Pizor, and that is the estrangement and confusion that is within yourself, within our own personalities. The inability to focus. This is indeed, if you think about this, and this, remember the Chuzim wrote about this way before the information age. But think about the impact of the internet, the impact of social media. You're hit with all sorts of inputs in a million different directions. Can't focus, can't concentrate, can't prioritize, can't focus on what's important because there's always a distraction out there. That creates an inner turmoil. I remember years ago when I was living in Maryland, so I saw an ad in one of the Jewish newspapers, the Washington Jewish Week. There was an ad, a certain delicatessen. It wasn't even a kosher delicatessen, but they were saying they sell mustard, and they say we have 300 brands of mustard. So we look at that as a great, great blessing. 300 brands of mustard. Wow. So think, I was thinking, my wife tells me, Friday afternoon, go to the store, pick up a jar of mustard. So I walk into the store, and I'm hit with 300 jars of mustard, assuming they have hechshers. What am I supposed to do? You get paralyzed with the abundance of what's available. Oh, go get a Dvar Torah off the internet. I don't even try that, right? Because I have no idea what to look at. Choice is in many ways, of course, a blessing, but choice can paralyze you. Choice can paralyze you a lot, and that's called Pizor. That biacharis hayomim, we're going to be pulled in so many different directions that we're just not able to focus on anything. When we're doing one thing, we're thinking about something else. And I do the something else, I'm thinking about something else after that. And you're busy taking pictures of an event, and you don't experience the event. Right? Sometimes you have husband and wife sitting, each of them is on their phone checking something else. Like, what's going on? We're not living in our own lives. So this is the profound idea that it's the fourth gezerah of Paro that creates the disjointedness, the confusion, the turmoil that exists both in terms of our interpersonal relationship and just in terms of our own internal mental balance. And again, the Yesod HaDvarim is that because these Gezeros were never carried out in their fullness in Mitzrayim, they needed to be carried out in a more extreme measure during the four exiles. The good news is that although none of us can give dates, and anyone that tries to give a date for the coming of Mashiach, Chazal were extremely critical. Chazal say people who try to calculate the end of days ought to burst, they ought to explode, meaning they shouldn't live. They're chayav misa for doing such a thing. And I think people need to be aware of that, because people, particularly in Eretz Yisrael, love to give prognostications about all sorts of things. We can't do that. We're not allowed to do that. At the same time, we are allowed to say that at least we're in the tekufah of Acharit Hayamim. We don't know if it'll be a year, 2 years, 10 years, 50 years, but we are at least in the periods. Things are happening. The idea of Yishmael doing tshuva. Yishmael, the person, did tshuva, and we are told, B'Acharit Hayamim, side by side with the Hamas Yishmael, the terrorists, the murderers, there is Dubai, there are these pockets of different Islamic nations, Arab nations, Saudi Arabia, again possibly, that want to make peace. Again, I'm not saying they're doing so for spiritual reasons, but Bitok Shalo Lishma, from not Lishma comes Lishma, so we're seeing Yishmael doing tshuva. We're seeing things happening in the world. And yes, some of them are tragic and some of them are disruptive. But once again, that too is described as characteristic of Acharis Hayamim, Chavlei Mashiach, birth pains of Mashiach, labor pains. Labor pains, I am told, I can't say I know firsthand, but very, very painful, very painful. And yet, from that pain comes great light, great bracha, great simcha. And that's hopefully what we're experiencing right now. So yes, in that end stage there will be pizor, scattering, not knowing where to focus, because that is the characteristic of Golus Edom. But at the same time, out of that pizor will eventually come the Or Gadol, the great light of the Mashiach. So may we be zeicha to see this Geula, Shlema Meir V'Yameinu, and in the immediate short term, may the Chatufim who are still alive, may all of them be safe and be reunited with their families very, very soon. Thank you.
It's your